This is Gunther Fehlinger podcast, and we are making real progress with the Voice of the Free World here from Vienna. We have now 122,000 followers on X, and we have now I've crossed 15,000. I will cross after this show because this show really lives with prominent guests and with interesting guests. And today I have another very interesting guest here on this podcast. It's Richard Spencer. I'm very happy that you take time directly from America ahead of Christmas presentations and celebrations, festivities. I'm very grateful that you take time. And I would like you to ask you to introduce yourself, and then we discuss a little bit about why the Americans seemingly have fallen out of love with us Europeans. And we would like to get into the good books of the Americans again. Richard, the floor is yours. Please introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you for having me on here, Gunther. I really appreciate your work, and I love following you and keeping up with all of your takes and the things you're promoting. So it's my honor to be here. I'm
Thanks.
also quite jealous because you get to be in Vienna for Christmas. I'm not sure there's a better place for Christmas than
If you like
being
lonely
in
places,
Wien.
it's the wrong place.
That is true. When I was a lot younger, some 20 years ago, I was in Bavaria and Vienna during December, not exactly Christmas, but the lead up. And I went to the Munich Christmas market, which was amazing. And I remember even walking around Vienna and getting some Glühwein and enjoying myself, but sort of just getting lost in Vienna. I didn't, I would just sort of walk without a destination in mind. And
Come
I
back
have really
again.
fond memories of that.
You're very welcome, and bring all your American friends because we in Vienna, we live of tourism, actually. We
That's
need
true. Yes.
American tourists. We're bringing American dollars to our beautiful Christmas markets. And we basically love you very much. And we want
Hmm.
more of you here.
Well, I would love to go hear the Wiener Philharmoniker or the to go to the Vienna Opera. It's the best place. It's one of the great cities of Europe. Stephan's Dome, all of it, all of the little things as well. So I would love to do that. But yes, you can find my work on Substack with it's Alexandria, and I do a podcast twice a week where we talk about world events. And we actually have a little university of sorts on weekends where we read great books. We were reading a little Homer, now we're reading the Gospel of Mark, and we analyze it in, I think, some surprising ways for some people. So I would encourage your viewers to check me out, see what you think.
Absolutely. I was already a part of your show. I think 1 year ago, you invited me
Hmm.
on your show, and I was honored to be there and to discuss about NATO enlargement. And it was very interesting for
Yes,
me also to have this debate. And now it's my
yes.
courtesy call for you to come to my show. And I'm very happy that this was also possible to
Hmm.
work together. And now, Richard, tell us a little bit about yourself. You are
Definitely.
in Wikipedia, they say you are the father of the alt-right term in many terms. So what you, and
Well,
there's
that's
some
true.
denial of you as well included. So what's your statement here?
Well, yes, there's a lot said about me on Wikipedia. Some of the things are factually accurate, and some of them are sort of extreme opinions. But yes, so I grew up. I was born in Massachusetts, in Boston, and I grew up in Dallas, Texas, and I went to the University of Virginia and the University of Chicago, and those are where my degrees are from. I was actually studying for a doctorate at Duke University, but I dropped out and I worked for a small magazine that's still around called The American Conservative. And that was sort of Pat Buchanan's magazine when I was there, at least. I don't think he ever was directly involved in editing, but it was sort of his baby, his vibe of I guess you could say anti George W. Bush conservatism
Oh
when it
no, George
started in
W.
the
Bush is my
2000s.
great
And
hero.
it was, well, I do have some. more nuanced opinions about that time. And I've even nuanced opinions about the neocons now. At the time in the 2000s, I was pretty vehemently against the Iraq War. And to be honest, it seems that most people would agree with me back in 2003 when I was just out of college, and in 2007 and 2008 when I was working at the American Conservative. But I'm not sure I agree with myself at this point. What I mean by
I was
that is
the
that
biggest
I think
defender of George Bush, and I totally agreed with the liberation of Iraq. And now it's 20 million new free people which live in Iraq. The population has increased from 26 to 46 million because of security, prosperity, and freedom. Thank you, George W. Bush.
I understand your perspective, and I guess I have a sort of critical perspective on those years now because I feel like there's a temptation towards isolationism that has really taken hold in the conservative movement as it is today, where people think that, $1 of money towards USAID or one USAID, I should say, or $1 of money towards a military base in Germany, $1 of money here, there, and everywhere, that's a dollar taken right out of your wallet. And we should just stop engaging in the world. And there was also a fantasy with the Ron Paul movement. And, I was involved in the Ron Paul movement as well in 2008 of if we could just bring them home, as Ron Paul would say, if we just remove the military bases from abroad, there would be free trade across the world and peace and brotherhood and all of those things that you can hear in in Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, which is probably being performed right this instant in Vienna. I don't believe any of those things anymore. I do think that the Iraq War was a blunder. I think it was a waste of treasure and lives. Let's remember there was probably 1 million deaths that occurred due to that invasion. But I do think that there's a temptation to be isolationist that is wrong. The fact is, American citizens, average Americans, benefit from the American empire, if I'm going to put it really bluntly, and we benefit from the internationalism, or even, dare I say, globalism that America has pursued since 1944. And it was that you can even look at this a little more deeply. In fact, we are a great beneficiary of the dollar system, to name one thing, which is that in 1944, there was the creation of Bretton Woods at the end of the Second World War. There sort of had to be a new paradigm. The British Empire, long in the tooth, it's flailing. Americans did not want, Hitler's designs of a kind of center or Central Europa kind of idea or whatever. And they certainly didn't want a communist globalism as well. There had to be a new paradigm that could make the world work. The fact is, people like Ron Paul believe that if military bases went away, if America stopped patrolling the seas, that there would be free trade and peace, love, and brotherhood. The exact opposite is the case. The free market, as we know it, is a product of politics. It's a product, it's a military product before it is an economic product. We are the beneficiaries as Americans of the dollar system, of the American empire, of American might around the world. And I don't think a lot of conservatives now really grasp that. And it was hard for me to grasp it at the time because I saw the Afghanistan campaign as hubristic, biting off more than we could chew. I saw the Iraq campaign, ditto. This is going to create all sorts of unintended consequences and death and destruction. We don't know what they're doing. And all of those are fair criticisms. And I still probably hold those. But I think I was tempted into that isolationism of we should just walk away from everything and it will all be fine. The fact is, we live on a planet There has to be some sort of paradigm that connects everything. Otherwise, we will be living in chaos. So, yes, the end of the American empire is a lot worse than any failing of the empire, any mistake made by the American empire. There have been many, but ending it really is worse. And I appreciate that as I grow older and as I think more deeply on these things, and as I read thinkers who are more of a realistic bent as opposed to a libertarian bent, or as opposed to a sort of Pollyannish isolationist bent of just leave the world alone, it will all be fine. I have changed in that sense. The weird thing is that I think that the conservative movement is adopting this same Pollyannish attitude towards the world. And it's even adopting a sort of sadistic pro-Russia attitude to the world. I don't think we can underestimate the degree to which followers of J.D. Vance, a lot of those people at TPUSA, America Fest, which maybe you've seen on your timeline, the Charlie Kirk event, I don't think we should underestimate the degree to which they hate Ukraine and want the worst for Ukraine and think that Russia is cool. Vladimir Putin, he's an Orthodox Christian. He hates the gays. Zelensky is some comedian in charge of a country, and they just want to pursue globo homo, as they call it in Ukraine. That's how they are seeing it. And you even have the Russian ambassadors who are deeply connected with Witkoff, Vance, etc., promoting this, that Russia is fighting against Satanism. In 2022, when the war began, Jordan Peterson said that Russia was building a wall. By invading Ukraine, it was building a wall against wokeness or what have you. So I think, just to sum up, on two levels, I think the conservatives have embraced a little bit of that Pollyannish attitude that I fell for 20 years ago. B, and much worse than this, I think many conservative leaders, J.D. Vance and Witkoff being extreme examples, but many average conservatives have embraced a pro-Russia attitude. They don't just want to not help Ukraine because it might have some unintended consequences. They actively want Russia to succeed. Steve Bannon was speaking about saving Russia from its own failings. Think of how many poor Russian soldiers have died in this invasion. We've got to do something. I mean, that is a predominant attitude, not among all or most even Republican voters, but that is a predominant attitude among, I would say, most Republican influencers and many people in the top levels of power. So I think it's something to be, from your perspective in Europe, who cares about NATO and the West, et cetera, I think it's something to be worried about, intensely worried about, in fact.
Richard, we are really very worried about, because, people like me, I'm very, very pro-American my life long, and I'm very pro Ronald Reagan and George Bush. I'm a student of the Young Americas Foundation. I'm the president 2 years of the European Conservative Students, EDS it's called, yeah? We admire America. We want a strong American transatlantic relation, and we want America to rule the world, basically, in a sense, as an anchor power to dominate and to set the rules for everybody. And what are you doing now in the last, especially this year, 2025? It feels like this famous step in the back.
I think it is. And I think America is stabbing itself in the back in this very weird way, in which Americans don't appreciate what we have built over the last century, or really since 1944, 1945, and the end of the Second World War. We don't appreciate how the American empire, despite many problems, and I totally get it in terms of with this sort of globalism that the American empire implies, outsourcing and immigration issues. I get it, but we also shouldn't underestimate the degree to which we have benefited from that. The ability for your average American to acquire goods, cheap food, televisions, etc., at a very low price is a direct result of American military power and the American empire and the American dollar system. And yeah, I get the temptation to say, we want to make those at home and so on. But the kind of dislocation that is going to imply is tremendous. The kind of wars that we might be involved in if we give up on a paradigm are going to be far worse than these small wars that we've been fighting, here and there throughout my lifetime. The fact is, Russia benefits from the right wing in the United States. And I know we have a tendency, because particularly people who are, I'm in my 40s, I'm 47, you're similar. We have sort of a tendency to view Russia as part of the left due to the Soviet history. Oh, they're supporting the Communist Party in the United States, or they're supporting the New Left, or the Red Army faction, or something like that. And they might do that again, etc. That's a real fear. But I think something else has happened. When I was involved in the alt-right, say 8 or 10 years ago, I was rubbing shoulders with pro-Russian forces. A lot of this had to do even with my ex-wife, to be honest. I mean, I published some works by Alexander Dugin that she was eagerly translating. So, I mean, I was deep in it. I wasn't as deep in it as other people, but I was there, and I felt that sort of influence. At this point, they don't need some sort of marginal intellectual like myself, someone who's a little bit outrageous, who pushes the envelope and is philosophical, etc. They don't need that type of person. They have J.D. Vance. They have Anna Paula Luna, or whatever, a former stripper who's in Congress. They have Charlie Kirk. To be honest, I wish Charlie Kirk hadn't been assassinated. That was a terrible thing. The fact is, Charlie Kirk was overtly pro-Russia and anti-Ukraine. And he is in charge of the largest, most influential group for young conservatives in the United States. They don't need marginal actors. They don't need a right-wing Red Army faction, a Republican Red Army faction. They don't need that when they have Steve Witkoff, who is answering directly to Donald Trump. And the degree to which Kushner is pro-Russia, I think there was an interesting article in the Wall Street Journal that came out. I mean, they have their tentacles everywhere. They can allow people like Witkoff to pull off some real estate deal with Russia, or some complicated scheme that was outlined by the Wall Street Journal's amazing reporting a few weeks ago. They can do that, and they can basically push America over the edge. The Russians do not. They think the West is satanic. That is how they directly depict what we are doing, and it's not just some extreme gay group up to nonsense and whatever. They think the West in itself is satanic. They think the things that conservatives love about the West are satanic. This so-called multipolarity, which seems to be sort of liberal in some way. We'll have our sphere, you'll have your sphere. It will all work. That's all bullshit. They absolutely hate Europe. They hate the things about Europe that conservatives actually love. They view that as Satan, and they are holding back the tide, holding back the entrance of the Antichrist, or whatever sort of nonsensical or fatuous psychology that they come up with in the Kremlin. So they don't mind if America falls off the cliff.
Yeah, but Putin is a KGB trained person. He lived 35 years in the KGB world. Yeah, he is an active agent trained by the enemy KGB. If anybody is the Antichrist, it's Vladimir Putin.
I totally agree. And I think if he succeeds, I think conservatives might view him as such, because what he wants in the West is chaos. So, yeah, they might support some left-wing activities. They might support some crazy conservative stuff. They might support the Candace Owens stuff. I'm very suspicious of that. She is basically attacking Western leaders, including Emmanuel Macron, who have been overall solid on the Ukraine question. And she's attacking him in the most outrageous, ridiculous fashion. So they want chaos in the West. That benefits them. That basically the end of the 20th century paradigm, which Vladimir Putin thinks is a geopolitical catastrophe, the end of the Soviet Union is what he's referring to.
Yeah.
Not necessarily Marxist economics, but basically this sort of stable, stable corruption that is basically a description of the Russian economic system, and a geopolitical power facing off against Europe. They see the end of the American empire, chaos of any kind, whether it's coming from the left, the right, top, bottom, Christians, atheists, Jews, Muslims, whatever. Any sort of chaos is good for them, because that paradigm has not allowed them to be a big daddy on the world stage. That paradigm of Bretton Woods, the American empire, patrolling the high seas, liberalism more or less as a paradigm for the world, neoliberalism even, that is antagonistic towards the Russian interest, where they can have their decaying, stodgy, gray, horrible, but stable Russian world that can, maintain itself as a geopolitical entity. Chaos benefits them. If that means the destruction of everything Americans hold dear, so be it. We're Satanists anyways. So that is
Richard,
the strategy.
And Putin's Russia, he has paid head premiums to the Taliban for American soldiers. I mean, yes. Putin's Russia is the enemy.
Absolutely.
It's not only about Ukraine. We are talking here about 20 years of consequent enemyship in all global conflicts, where America is leading the West and Russia is the enemy. How can any American patriot support Vladimir Putin's war in Ukraine? It's for me a mystery.
If you had told me that Republicans would be pro-Putin and pro-Russia, and liberals would be willing to take up the mantle of the Cold War, I never would have believed you. If you had told me that 20 years ago, I never would have believed you. But that is exactly what has happened.
It's unbelievable.
Yes.
It's a complete reversal of nature.
Do you think, Gunther, that there was ever a real opportunity to integrate Russia into the West, particularly in the Yeltsin and then Putin period?
But
because
this is what the West always tried. Bill Clinton was trying desperately to stabilize democratic Russia under Yeltsin. And we Europeans, we were not so powerful, but we tried as well. But the thing is, we basically lost the civil war inside Russia. It was Putin's group who won against the Democrats, against the conservatives, against the Europeans, if you want to say. He killed them
Yeah.
all, and he won it. And now, it's not that we rejected Russia, but it was Putin's clique who won the civil war inside Russia and imposed his vision of revanchist Russia on Russia after 99. And later, then he had the money and the resources after 10 years of consolidation to take this money. We as Europeans have basically paid him for his energy. He took it to
Yes.
America to buy influence and change the Republican Party.
Yes. I mean, I was recently reading a biography of Putin, and you do get the sense. I mean, he desperately wanted to be a KGB agent from a very young age, and when he was given an interview, he was given the big ask. It was like Santa Claus, delivered him his most wished for present under the tree. I don't know if he has an ideology. I don't think Vladimir Putin is Marxist exactly. And I don't think he thinks in the way that early Bolshevik leaders would think of a global revolution and a transformation of every economy around the world and beyond even. I don't think he thinks like that. I think he is a product of a solidified, very much non-progressive Soviet sphere that he wants to maintain. He thinks in terms of the way to do economics is to be massively corrupt and basically work with some oligarchs and get some kickbacks yourself, and occasionally claim that there are persecuted Russian speakers somewhere, and then invade the country and throw a bunch of soldiers into the meat grinder. I think that is his overriding expectation for politics. That's what he wants. I don't think he actually has a big dream for the world in the way that Trotsky or Lenin clearly did. Those were intellectuals who became revolutionaries and then intellectuals who became politicians. Vladimir Putin's not an intellectual by any stretch of the imagination. He basically understands the modus operandi of his life in the mid to late Soviet Union and then projects that forward as Russian traditionalism, what we deserve, how the world should be, etc. But that has clear geopolitical implications. I mean, just to be totally fair here, I do understand why he would want to take over Ukraine, in the sense that there is a geographic funneling mechanism with Ukraine where a German army or a European army could march through Ukraine to the Caspian and basically deliver a kind of knockout blow to the Russian Empire. Because Russia is inherently an empire. Russia is not like Prussia or not like most Western and Central European states, where they have clearly defined borders. They're facing off against adversaries on all sides. They need to be sort of ensconced in a territory. Many borders are created by either bodies of water, rivers, mountain ranges. That's not what Russia is. Russia is this massive zone, basically, where you need mobility across large swaths of territory to keep it going. And
Richard,
there could be
recently
a
nobody
knockout
wanted
blow.
to attack Russia. We seriously don't want to attack Russia. I can make a statement here. Nobody wanted to attack Russia. This is all in the 1940s, the last time. Now we are a peaceful European Union. We are the nice guy. And some people like Elon Musk want to X us. And explain me, why is that?
Musk.
Why is that? With his 220 million followers, he has decided to X the friendly European Union, the peaceful European Union. And he thinks that Russia is cool. and we are the bad guys. And this somehow is so far from the reality that we are really just flabbergasted here in Europe.
I don't understand Elon Musk motivations. I mean, there's some interesting connections with Russia early on with SpaceX and so on, but I don't know if that is sufficient to explain why he has been so consistently pro-Russia. Not at the very beginning of the Ukraine conflict, but from mid 2022 onward. I don't understand it. But to go back really quickly, just to finish my thought, even if Europeans have been peaceful, nice guys, a bit decadent, we might say, after the Fukuyamian end of history that occurred in 1991. I get it, how ostensibly it's ridiculous to think that Germany would want to invade Russia again, or an EU army. I get it. But I think Vladimir Putin thinks in terms of these long periods of time. He sort of projects them. When he was in that ridiculous interview with Tucker Carlson, he was talking about treaties that he found in an archive somewhere in Moscow from the Middle Ages, and how Russia was betrayed even then. I mean, it was absurd on some level. It was like me finding some guy who borrowed $100 from my grandfather and demanding the money back. Just this sort of like conflation or collapse of time, where he's still living 1,000 years ago and so on. So I think he does believe that even if it's not right this instant, that eventually Europeans will get their act together. They'll become Nazis once again. Again, that denazification thing in Ukraine was, I'm not saying this is going to happen. I'm saying this is how he thinks. And that they will just invade once more in order to destroy Moscow. I do believe that that is how he thinks. I don't think you can fully explain the Ukraine invasion purely on the notion of fear of the Zelensky regime. I don't think you can explain it fully on just graft, just sucking resources, taking things that were once part of the Russian sphere. I don't think you can fully explain it. I think geopolitics has to be involved in an understanding of why Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine. And again, if you understand it in that way, you understand that Putin is going to go further. There were many other countries that are now in NATO or in the European sphere writ large that were once part of the Soviet Union, that were once part of the Russian Empire. And I absolutely believe that he wants those back. There was an interesting intelligence report that came out in Reuters, et cetera, about he's going to start invading other countries. That intelligence might very well be correct. But the point is, that's all coming from Vladimir Putin's worldview. Those are all emanating from his basic presumptions about what Russia should be. So whether the intelligence is solid or not, it's correct in the sense that that is how he views the world. And at this point, why have a pretense about being integrated in Europe to this degree or that? Why not just become an antagonistic entity fully? You're not going to be welcomed back into Germany anytime soon. So why not start taking back that territory that was lost? I mean, Vladimir Putin worked in East Germany. He thinks of that. His basic presumption is that those territories should be in the Russian sphere, even if they're still speaking German, even if they are different religiously, even they should be integrated into the Soviet bloc. That is how he thinks.
Since 35 years ago, when we won with American help, with Ronald Reagan and George Bush father, we won the Cold War. And then there were about 150 million Europeans liberated from communism. Thanks a lot, America. And this
Hmm.
was a unique thing. And we integrated about 100 million new people into the European Union and in NATO with your help, with your guidance, with your security umbrella. And these people all wanted to join and they wanted to be free. And they are now relatively prosperous in Romania and in Poland. These are really very successful,
No
relatively big
doubt.
countries, and they are really doing quite well with low taxes and good defense industries and good thriving economies. And things are going really well after a generation of freedom. And now, why is America considering to treat us as a civilizational decline, as a collapsing continent, and all these things which are in this security strategy, which seemingly J.D. Vance has put forward now as an official government document, yeah? And he's portraying Europe. And I'm living now here in Vienna, and I know every single country of Europe actually for my travels and my work. And I know it's a
Hmm.
wonderful and very, very successful continent. Maybe not as successful as we could be, and not as wonderful as America, but we are far from this kind of persiflage and negative image which American government documents are now portraying us. And we are in Europe, not only the left, but they were always anti-American, but also from the conservatives here. We are a little, not a little bit, we are totally shocked or surprised how anybody in America can have such a picture of us.
The antagonism towards Europe in the conservative movement actually goes quite deep. Even 20, 30 years ago, you would hear memes at conservative events of, we're not going to become Europe, we're not going to become the European Union. And that was kind of constellation of different things. There was the Muslim immigration into Europe, particularly after 9/11. It's like they're inviting in the terrorists who took down the towers. That was one
we
notion.
have we have not invited anybody.
I understand. I mean, there are some problems there. There's the refugee crisis of 2015 was also quite big. That was in many ways the fault of Angela Merkel, who accepted sovereign responsibility
But we
for the
never invited
refugees.
them. They came from alone.
Yes. Well, they also remember Vladimir Putin was opening up channels for refugees
Yeah,
as
Vladimir
well.
Putin pumped everybody in Syria into a submission that the people had to run away through Turkey. It was him
Yes,
creating the refugee crisis, Vladimir the Antichrist, and not.
exactly. Vladimir the Antichrist, who, yes, absolutely wants to take down all that is good in Europe. And he benefited from the refugee crisis in multiple ways. It is chaotic, and it also inspires or legitimizes right wing politicians whom he is funding, like the AFD. So, you might, again, if your listeners or viewers don't know that much about me, oh, Richard Spencer, he's right wing, he must love the AFD. I don't support the AFD at all. It's specifically due to their policy towards Russia and their sort of fantasy idea that Germany can be independent in this day and age, have an independent foreign policy. It's not desirable, but it's not even possible. But anyway, putting that aside, the chaos of the refugee crisis undoubtedly is in favor of Vladimir Putin, and that is why he has, in fact, supported this crisis and supported the right wing politicians who are going to scream about it the loudest and are pro Russia. AFD being paradigmatic in that regard. Now, there are other animosities towards Europe from conservatives of, the cheese eating surrender monkeys in France didn't support the Iraq War. There's taxes are too high. I mean,
That's
I sort of
true.
get it, but I think the animosity has been different. I don't remember hearing pro Russia commentary from mainstream conservatives 10 years ago. And in fact, and I will admit my own fault here, in 2014 and thereabouts, pro Russia statements were coming from people like me. I'll absolutely admit that, in the sense they're coming from the alt right, we were trying to be edgy. We saw, again, I have evolved. I've become more reflective on these things as I've gotten older. And at that period, pro-Russia, anti-American commentary was coming from the alt-right, from my sphere. At this point in time, it is coming from the mainstream right, and it is coming from people in the government, if not exactly Donald Trump himself. Donald Trump is a bit of a wild card here because Donald Trump is above those types. He's above Witkoff. He's above J.D. Vance. He's above even Elon Musk. And he doesn't have an ideology. His ideology is Trump. His ideology is his own narcissism and grasp for more money and fame and power and defeating his personal enemies who slighted him over the past years. That is his ideology. Trump, and I didn't vote for Donald Trump. I voted for Kamala Harris, and I voted for Joe Biden in 2020. But I would say that, and I'm speaking objectively here, I'm not speaking from my heart, I'm speaking from my head. Due to Donald Trump's extreme egomania, he actually is a wild card in this scenario because he doesn't have he can't be influenced over a long period of time. He can be influenced by the last person who whispered in his ear, but over a long period of time, he is going to pursue his agenda. And my prediction around a year ago was that Trump wanted to be a peacemaker in Ukraine. And, this never would have happened if I were in office, that kind of stuff. And he wanted to just end the war and be given a prize and be applauded at conferences, etc. Now, my interpretation was that he wasn't going to be able to do this because Putin hasn't yet conquered territory that he officially annexed in 2022. The war has not gone well for Vladimir Putin, and the reputation of the Russian army is dog food at this point. My interpretation was that Putin was going to keep pressing Donald Trump, press for more and more, and that purely out of ego, Donald Trump would turn on Vladimir Putin. And Donald Trump is not anti-war. He might talk like that. We ended 7 wars. You're welcome, world. Donald Trump has long been obsessed with guns, nuclear weapons, being the strong man. There's no better way of achieving those ego dreams than going toe-to-toe with the Ruskies, in the words of Dr. Strangelove. So J.D. Vance seems motivated in ways that I don't fully understand. Elon Musk clearly seems motivated, again, in ways that are inexplicable to me. Donald Trump is a wild card, and I think there is still it looks bad right now. There's no doubt about it. But let's remember a few things about Donald Trump. Donald Trump said this as a criticism. It's true. Obama sent blankets to Ukraine. The first time lethal aid went to Ukraine was in the Trump administration, and Trump brags about this stuff.
He sent the javelins. The javelins
yes.
were decisive to repel the Russian invasion in the early days of 2022 around Kiev. And it was the American javelins sent by Trump who helped the Ukrainians to defend Kiev.
So aid to Ukraine has, in effect, been shut down. What is happening now is that Europeans are, in a sense, buying American weapons and giving them to Ukraine. So it's a sort of Trumpian deal of let's make money off this thing. Let's not be charitable. That's not the worst thing that I could imagine. But
he could sell us some tomahawks, and we could teach the Russians a good lesson of American justice with some good tomahawks. And then Putin would sue for peace very fast.
I totally agree. it could be better, but it also could be worse right now. All I'm saying is that in 2026, we don't fully know what's going to happen because Trump himself is in charge and Trump himself is a wild card. Now, there are other people that I don't think are wild cards. I do think that Witkoff, Vance, Musk, et cetera, these are wolves in the henhouse, or fox in the henhouse, whatever the metaphor is. They are bad actors, and they are consistently bad. Trump, I would suggest, is a wild card due to his bizarre egomaniacal personality.
So Trump normally wants to be on the winning side. So we have to tip the side towards Ukraine. We just recently took 90 billion of a loan of European euros to send to Ukraine to give. It was just last Friday. And it is a decision to fund Ukraine for another 2 years. And that will be enough money for that. And so Ukraine will definitely sustain. And I can assure you, no matter what is coming, we will keep Ukraine in the fight. And we will win this war. But it would be much easier with more American firepower attached to the European money. And this is my question. Do you think that America will stand with us and with Ukraine in 26?
I think it looks, I am repeating myself a little bit here. I think it looks bad right now because there are moves in the United States to stop even selling weapons to Ukraine. We've seen these peace deals that get leaked and so on. I think it actually looks quite bad. My hope is that Donald Trump's pathological, toxic personality might in fact be the savior of Ukraine. Because if he starts to view Russia as losing dramatically, he can switch sides because he loves winners. You know, he's always taking photos with boxers and pop stars or whatever. Whoever, if you win, he likes you, basically. He's not a serious person, in effect. But the other thing is that if he starts to feel slighted personally by Vladimir Putin, I could also see a dramatic change. So I think the Russian army is on the ropes at this point. This has not gone well. Vladimir Putin is raising taxes, doing all these sort of things that he otherwise would not do to maintain the fight. So, I mean, I don't think any realistic person could look at this and say, the amazing Russian army. It's on the ropes, but it could be saved by some terrible peace deal that is pursued by Witkoff and company that they personally benefit from, and that basically gives Russia a respite, where much like there were 9-10 years between the Ukrainian crisis in 2014 and then the invasion in 2022, you're going to have a similar situation of 5 years. Oh, we have this peace, and what are we going to learn? Oh, Russian speakers are being persecuted in Ukrainian territory. The Ukrainian army, it's larger than what we agreed to. They're going to come up with some pretext and they're going to continue the invasion because this is, from Vladimir Putin's perspective, existential. So I think we're in a very difficult time right now. I mean, I would love to say here, I think 2026 is going to be amazing for Ukraine, but I'm not sure. I think much more likely it's this ambiguity is going to continue. Is there going to be a real big turning point with, say, a Russian collapse? That would be wonderful. Maybe all these suing for peace is an attempt to stave off a collapse that even Vladimir Putin can see. I hope that's the case. But if I were to make a realistic prediction, I would say that the ambiguity is going to continue for another year.
2026 is also an election year in the United States with the November midterms coming up, which will be decisive for Trump and MAGA and the internal struggles of the Republican Party. What's your prediction for this 2026 November elections? Will Trump be able to keep the control of the Congress, or will he lose the power over the American legislative process?
My prediction is that he will lose power over the legislature, over Congress, that is. It's a long-term trend. The first midterm election after a new president goes the other way. There are a few counterexamples to this: 2002 with George W. Bush, your man. But mostly you will see a reversal. The cowboy, yes.
He was good. He
Yes.
enlarged NATO. He put 7 countries into NATO.
It's true.
And he oversued. And, I'm a European conservative. For me, really matters most what happens here in Europe. Yeah? And this was the American president who understood Europe, who was ready for resources for Europe, for political capital. And he oversaw the enlargement of 10 new countries. Half of Eastern Europe came into the EU under his presidency, and 7 new countries. And he went to Croatia in 2009 when he was no longer the president, when Croatia and Albania were coming into the into NATO. And the scene was like this: George Bush going to Zagreb and crying for emotion, because he saw the country which was liberated under his father from Yugoslavia and joined NATO. He was emotionally really there. And on the contrary, was Obama at the meeting of NATO. He was the president already, and he just put Senator, the prime minister of Croatia, and the prime minister of Albania into some shady corner for quick signing, and didn't even stop for making a selfie with the prime ministers, because he really didn't care. But George Bush, he cared for us. Sorry to this emotional.
It's fine. As problematic as George Herbert Walker Bush was with Ukraine, we shouldn't forget that. He wanted to continue the Cold War.
Americans have a sense of unity. You love unity of Russia, which I really don't know. But
I understand. I think George Herbert Walker Bush's failings are sort of understandable. You're an older gentleman. You were raised in the stability of the Cold War.
Yes.
We don't want to fuck that up, to be blunt about it. So I sort of understand his failings, but I think regardless, George W. Bush was a product of that generation. He's a boomer. He was born in 1946, I believe. So he lived through the Cold War. He understands that paradigm. He saw in the middle of his life, 1989, as a wonderful event. And, I don't even know how JD Vance views 1989. What did the Germans betray Russia or something? They joined the satanic gay West. I think that's how he might view it. I mean, it's just absurd.
By the way, the gay thing in Europe, we have, of course, also gay people, but our politicians are not gay. We are not gay, and we are not gay Europa.
I agree.
I just want to make that very clear, with all respect to all sexual liberties and freedom, but we are very much the same like America. We are not different.
Of course. And I see a lot to admire in the German Chancellor Merz and other things. I mean, I think things are looking good in terms of where we are.
He's, by the way, a real flat tax conservative, and he is a real conservative all his life. He was in a Christian student fraternity during his studies, and still is. And he is really like whatever the dream any conservative in America can have, to have a German chancellor.
I wonder, I'll just throw this out. I'll be a little Candace Owensy here. But in reverse. Angela Merkel, I think, was a truly disastrous chancellor of Germany. And it's almost as if she were an East German deep agent meant to promote Russia and undermine the Western world order. And I mean that rather seriously. She presided over the ending of nuclear power in Germany. She presided over the constructions of these pipelines that, natural resources go to the West, Ostpolitik, and money goes to the East. And there's a building of a bridge between Russia and Germany in that way. She presided over the refugee crisis. She claimed sovereign authority over bringing refugees to Germany. She was a total catastrophe. And I don't know if she were a Kremlin agent. I say that with my tongue in my cheek, say that a little bit jokingly, but she almost acted as if she were. I would just say that. I think she was a terrible chancellor.
Richard, in the hindsight, after we have seen the disaster of the Putin's attack, it's always easy to judge then the politicians 20 years
True.
later and say what they have done wrong. And so I'm not a big defender of Angela Merkel in many ways because she destroyed my dream of a flat tax movement in 2022. But in reality, she was never the sole ruler of Germany. She always
That's
had
true.
a social democratic party as a partner who was very close to Russia. Yes. And she always managed the situation as she found it. And she lacked maybe a little bit the coolness to override all the gentlemen around her. And she should have done that. But it would have helped as well to have a partner in America to manage the world together with her. I'm sure she would have resisted Russia harder if there would have been not Obama in the White House, who ultimately said, let Crimea, let it go, and let's not confront the Russians. Because the truth is, in Europe, we are relatively defenseless without American hard power. You are having the nuclear power over Europe. You are our nuclear deterrents. You have the big military bases in Italy and Germany from the Second World War. You have the command and control system in America that you are able to project power globally. You have the nuclear aircraft carriers in our seas, and that was always quite convenient because we didn't have a very good track record for fighting wars anyhow. We were fighting on the wrong side, you remember? We were the Nazis,
one another
and
as well.
You had to defeat us first, yeah. And then it was not so practically to give nuclear power to the defeated Nazi Germany. I think that would have been many Americans quite sure about that.
Understandable, yes.
Understandable. And so it continued a little bit, and Angela Merkel was the continuation of Germany, which was run by America, and we were quite peacefully. And the way to deal with Putin when you don't have weapons is to buy his energy. And I don't want to defend this, but the way we fought in Europe, and most of these people on the top for the last 30 years had the idea, we buy a lot of things from Russia, and then he will not kill us. That was the deal.
Yes. I understand. My tongue was in my cheek and suggesting things about Angela Merkel.
Because some of the viewers might know the details, but in 2015, it was like this, that Putin was basically defeating Ukraine already. In the February 2015, Putin has won the war in Ukraine and his armies were on the march. And the only thing we as Europeans with Obama missing in action, hello, Mr. Super nice, friendly Obama. He was nowhere to be found. No telephone picked up. No nuclear supremacy. No kind of pushback to the Russians. So the only thing the Europeans could do in Minsk is offer Putin to buy more energy and make him from super rich to mega rich. And this is exactly what we did. The whole mystery of Nord Stream 2 is that was the only idea the Europeans had, to buy Putin into the system to stop his tanks. Because there were no German tanks, there were no Polish tanks, there were no Ukrainian tanks, there were no Austrian tanks. Maybe the French had some tanks and the British, but they were 1,500 kilometers away. And Putin could have easily marched into Kiev in March 2015. And we decided that that's a really bad idea. And we gave him more money. And he used this more money to make another war in 2022. And again, we are depending on America. And you can blame it all on Merkel. But it doesn't help a lot because
I understand.
She did what was in her options of action. It was the only.
She was going with the zeitgeist as well as what you're saying, and now the zeitgeist has changed, and so
now America has changed. At the moment, we are starting to get a bit more fighting power, and because Merz, he has put 500 billion euros now on the block of new debt in order to buy new weapons to arm Germany to the teeth in order to be able to defend Ukraine and Europe, because you are missing out. and you use your 900 billion defense budget, a huge amount of money, by the way, which is ever increasing, for exactly what? For playing around in the Caribbean, and instead of winning the decisive war of our century.
I agree with that, although keep in mind that Venezuela is not totally disconnected from Russia. You have a sort of Russian third world sphere of alliances. And I don't think those two things are totally disconnected, although I do agree with your overriding point, which is that this is the war of our time. This is where we need to be bold and strategically clear as opposed to ambiguous. I completely agree with that. Let me ask you. So I lived through the Fukuyama era of the end of history and Europe as a high tax, decadent museum. That's what it was. You would go there and lots of wonderful healthcare. You could visit the Louvre or those old cathedrals, but it was sort of outside of world history. Do you think that not in 2026, but in 2036, that in the next decade, Europe by necessity is going to have to become a independent, armed continent that is able to plausibly deter Russia itself without? And do you think that's going to happen? And do you think it can happen? Do you think that the Europeans are up for that? And that goes for the politicians as well as the average Fritz and out there. Do you think they're willing to do that?
Yes, we have to, because we definitely will not be slaves of Russia, and we will definitely defend ourselves, and we will defend Ukraine, whatever the costs. Whatever the costs means, whatever it takes financially, but also militarily. Nobody wants to be under Russian supremacy anymore. And it was very convenient. It was, by the way, not decadent, but it was very practically that we had a little bit of American protection for the last 70 years. It was good for you. It was good for us. It was like sharing the burden. And
I agree.
it was actually quite good, because in Europe, with our history and again, it comes back to World War II. We made pretty bad things in World War II. And we were fighting America, basically. We were challenging the Western world order because we believed in our own supremacy. My grandfathers, we believed that the German, if you want to say, race is superior to the rest, and we are unfairly not on the top of the world. And therefore, we had to fight the world. And we were defeated by the world. And then it was not so popular to put money into the army. We did it anyhow, because we had actually in Germany a very high defense budget, until 7% on the height of the Cold War, because our American friends and protectors told us, you have to pay for your own defense as well, because the boys of Ohio can only come after some months. We need also German meat on the border to defend against the Soviets. And we put it. It was like this. After after we won, it was convenient to disarm, but that we live in decadency. Okay, we have maybe too high pensions. I agree, we have too high taxes, but it's not that we are the enemy state because we have higher welfare and pension systems.
100% agree. Yes.
It's a bit what JD Vance is putting. Yeah, it's okay. There's 100 things I want to change in Europe as a conservative, on free speech, on taxes, on welfare, and on migration. But that doesn't put us into the status of an enemy or hostile combatant, because the hostiles are sitting in Russia.
100%. The West does not make sense without Europe as well. There is no Western culture without the European people and so many of these physical expressions. I mean, there's many great places in the United States, but I also tell you, it's a bit like the whole of the continent of North America is kind of like Las Vegas, more than it is like Vienna or Paris. It's sort of fake. It's a little too new. It's a little too much about money and so on. The concept of the West does not exist without Europe. And that includes the people and also the artistic and physical manifestations of
I
us.
mean, this is not meant for, but this historic fact that we are the cradle of the global civilization and of
Yes.
certainly of the Christian civilization, there is
Mm-hmm.
simply a historic fact. And to disabandon us now and to prefer us to Russia under Putin is like, anyhow, beyond any reason and beyond any rationality. And anyhow, explain me something because you are also very deeply involved in party politics. Yeah. And what is now the big topic is Elon Musk's 20, I think 220 million followers. And he puts people in the spotlight, and that's powerful today. It's a power he has. He puts people
Yes.
like Robertson in the UK or the AFD, Mrs. Alice Weidel, in the spotlight, and he promotes people. And I always try to push back. What's the, why did you defeat the Nazis in 45 when you want to have the Nazis back in Germany in power in 2025? I don't say that the AfDs are like Hitler. They are, of course, they are not
It's
committing
more
Holocaust,
complicated than that. Yeah.
but they are not, and you could, the American conservatives could support Friedrich Merz and his CSU and CDU. These are mainstream political parties like the conservatives, like the Republican Party, and it would be a wonderful mutual support world where we cut taxes together, we defeat our enemy Russia, and we unite NATO, and we make the West great again together. But no, all these really famous and millions of people follow their advice, and he supports our enemies, internal enemies. Yeah. And you
I
already
would
made a statement against AfD. I appreciate that, but I would like to understand why this is happening.
I don't have a firm answer, but I will say something that maybe gets us closer to the answer. Because someone like Tommy Robinson is not exactly a Nazi or fascist in the sense that he wants a powerful Berlin led European order. Tommy Robinson gives us a glimpse, and Geert Wilders as well, they give us a glimpse of another type of alliance. And that alliance is actually involving Russia and also involving Israel. Tommy Robinson is fanatically pro Israel to the point that he will defend things that I think most reasonable people simply cannot at this point, including the destruction of Gaza and this just ongoing ambiguity of the occupation that doesn't seem to be able to resolve in any sort of humane, civilized manner. I will just suggest that there's one way of thinking about it. It's sort of how the neoconservatives see the world, where there is the Cold War era NATO alliance, there's the West, and that sort of includes Israel and America and the West. There's a three legs to it. And so it's a little bit contradictory, you could say, but it works. There is maybe another vision of the world that we see emanating from Tommy Robinson, from the AFD, from Elon Musk, from JD Vance. And that is a new three-legged stool: America, Russia, and Israel. And it's a sort of alternative geopolitics. It includes the same players, but will be fundamentally different. And again, that is how I see it, because I don't fully understand it. The fact is, Elon Musk might give a Hitler salute here and there, but he's not a Nazi, and he actually is clearly dedicated to Israel, and I don't think he is truly anti-Semitic in any real fashion. Ditto Tommy Robinson, ditto AfD, ditto Geert Wilders, etc. So there's something else happening here, and maybe there are some people who feel like it's not just Europe is decadent, it's going down, birth rates low, etc., but also America is not long for this world, and it's going down. It has so many of the same problems, and maybe we need to kind of reconfigure things with an alliance between Russia, Israel, and the United States. And Europe would just simply be left out of that. And the notion of the West, as we know it, would no longer be a primary component of this alliance. Now, this is all broad strokes. This is a bit speculative, but I wouldn't put out of your mind the deep ties between Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister of Israel, and Vladimir Putin, including the Russian Jews who might not, I won't say it, who are part of his voting bloc and alliance in Israel. So I think there are some dark things going on. I don't think you and I, because we're out of that loop, I don't think we can fully understand it. But we can look at the phenomenon of this occurring. You know, why is there so much friendliness between Witkoff, Kushner, Putin, Netanyahu? What is going on there? What is that? And I would suggest that there is a sort of alternative geopolitics that we could perhaps glimpse. I would throw Peter Thiel in there as well, as someone who was pro-Russia, pro-Israel, and has a kind of alternative vision of America. Now, vis-a-vis that thing that might be emerging, I am 101% on the side of NATO and the West.
Thanks a lot, Richard. I would like to understand why American leaders, it doesn't matter which political parties, but all these personalities you have mentioned now, you know, they support this European right wing. And like you mentioned, many of them, Robertson, I don't know him very well, but I know the history of the German and Austrian political parties. Yeah. And, you know, these are all very, very strong anti-American forces. In Germany, the nationalists, and in Austria, the nationalists, their origin is very much anti-Americanism. This is their blood and butter, you know. We are under the American Yankees. We hate America, American world. We want to end Pax Americana, and then we want to end NATO. These are their kind of ideological frames for over decades now, in many ways. Yeah, this is simply also in French right, yeah, or the Italian right, yeah. And how can American leaders, in their good mind, support the anti-American extremists in Europe? As American,
it doesn't make sense. But if you start to dig down, and again, this is a theory of mine that I would stress. If you dig down and say, well, it doesn't make sense, but does it make sense on a deeper level? Is there an attempt to create a new world order of Israel, Russia, and the United States reconfigured and leaving America out? If that is the case, then everything you just said makes sense. Because we can throw money and tweets and popularity at these right-wing fanatics like Tommy Robinson, the AFD, Eric Wilders, etc. We can just sort of let them go because all they're doing is creating division and chaos. They claim they're nationalists. The age of nationalism is over at this point. The coming age will be about civilization and not nationalism. Europe is weaker, period, end of statement, when it is divided into 100 different parts, each of which are sovereign in the sense that they're fighting one another endlessly. Divide and conquer is the age-old strategy of domination. So why, if you hate Europe, you would be promoting nationalism in Europe of this right-wing variety. Divide and conquer. So if, again, my theory would explain what is going on, but I would stress that it is just a theory. It's my own way of making sense that perhaps there's this horrible new world order that might be emerging. China is an interesting component of that. Russia has the resources. Israel is religiously important, obviously, but also strategically important. And America, it contains many of those factors. Is there some new world order emerging? I a fear that that might be the case.
Let's hope the world order will be stable, built on Western civilization, on NATO and the EU. And in my closing remark, I would also, Richard, like to ask you, is there hope for the West? Are you optimistic ahead of 2026? Because it's now Christmas as well. And I want to have a somehow optimistic closing statement from your side. What we need to do in the West, pro-Western forces in America and in Europe, to ensure that our world order wins and that we will be united, and all these internal rivalries into the GOP will be won by decent mainstream conservatives who believe in the West and who will fight for NATO and for Ukraine.
Well, the good news is that I do believe that the Democrats are going to take over Congress in the coming year, and they will thus have power in 2027. And the Democrats are a different party. I would sort of forget things like woke or gay or whatever the hell the conservatives think they are. I think the Democratic Party, simply because the right wing has gone in this horrible direction, the Democratic Party has an opportunity to be pro-Western, to be pro-NATO, and to be pro-Ukraine, if only because it's in opposition to the Republicans and the conservatives. So I think that is very powerful. But I would leave you on this, and I am getting called to return to the gingerbread upstairs, so I'll have to leave. But
I'm also called by my wife, actually. She just came home from work and said, Gunther, enough fun here. It is nice to talk to you.
Well, she's making some Glühwein, I hope.
Okay, it's ancient European civilization which you cherish in America, and I'm very happy. Richard, I wish you and your family a Merry Christmas, a Happy New Year, health and success, and for united, strong Western world, NATO and the EU. Thanks a lot for joining the show, and looking forward to stay in touch in 2026.
Definitely. Gleichfalls for you, Gunther. I wish you all the best and a Merry Christmas. And I hope we'll be able to speak again in 2026.
Thanks a lot. Looking forward. All the best.
Thank you.
Thanks from Vienna.